The sound of his hand on her face carried all the way to the
You
back
should
of the
have known
formation.
who you were dealing with.
2,000 Marines heard it. Not one of them moved. Rear Admiral Dalton Ashcroft stood with his palms still open, and the woman in front of him, 25 olive t-shirt, camo trousers, dark honey hair, pulled back into a ponytail, did not stumble, did not gasp, did not raise a hand to her cheek. She turned her head back to center and looked at him with eyes that held absolutely nothing. Blood gathered at the corner of her mouth. She let it fall. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel and follow Adeline's journey all the way to the end. And comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The blood hit the concrete before anyone remembered how to breathe. Lieutenant Adeline Carrick did not touch her face. That was the first thing that went wrong for Dalton Ashcroft, though he wouldn't understand it for another 3 days. She didn't touch her face. She didn't step back. She didn't blink the water out of her eyes the way people do when they've been struck hard enough to make the eyes water on their own. She simply rolled her jaw once the way you'd test a hinge and brought her chin back to level. Then she looked at him. Ashcroft had spent 31 years learning how to read a room, and in that moment the room told him something he did not want to hear. 2,000 Marines in formation, and every single one of them had stopped being an audience and started being a jury. He felt it on the back of his neck like a change in air pressure. He should have walked away right then. He knew it. Some cold, competent part of him, the part that had gotten him 3 commands in a corner office and a name, people said carefully that part was already shouting at him to turn on his heel and let the moment die. Instead, he heard his own voice come out of him, too loud, cracking at the edges. "Get this civilian off my parade ground." 2 military police started forward from the flank. Boots on concrete. 10 steps, 12. And then they stopped. That was the second thing that went wrong, and Ashcroft felt that one too, because the MPs weren't looking at the woman. They were looking at him, and there was a question in it. One of them, a corporal, 23 years old, whose entire professional life had been built on the principle that admirals do not have to explain themselves, had gone the color of wet paper. Adeline understood exactly what had happened. She'd handed those 2 men her credentials at the gate 90 minutes ago and watched them read the header 3 times. She'd watched the older one's thumb move over the seal like he was checking whether it would smudge. People always did that. The seal never smudged. She did not say anything. She had learned a long time ago that silence was a load-bearing wall and that men like Ashcroft would climb it themselves if you gave them long enough. He gave it about 4 seconds. "I don't care who signs your paperwork." His voice had dropped, which was worse. "This is my command, my Marines, my ceremony, and I will not have some girl in a t-shirt playing soldier in the middle of it." She spoke then, quietly, not for the formation, for him. "You just struck a federal officer in front of 2,000 witnesses, sir. I'd like you to sit with that for a moment before you do anything else." The parade ground had been quiet before. Now it was something past quiet. 2,000 people all holding the same breath at the same time makes a kind of pressure you can feel in your teeth. Ashcroft stepped in close enough that she could smell coffee and expensive cologne, and underneath both the sour edge of a man who had already gone further than he'd planned to. His hand came up. She caught it. Not violently. There was no snap, no twist, no drama. Her fingers simply closed around his wrist, mid-arc, the way you'd catch a set of keys tossed across a room, and his arms stopped as though it had run into a wall that had always been there. The front rank made a sound. Not a gasp, exactly, something smaller and more honest than that. The sound 30 people make when they all flinch at once. Ashcroft pulled. His arm did not move. He pulled harder, and he felt for the first time in maybe 20 years the pure, humiliating fact of his own physical limits. He was 58 years old. He ran 4 miles 3 times a week and told people about it. And this woman was holding his wrist with what he could tell, with terrible clarity, was not very much effort at all. She held it for 3 seconds. She counted them. He felt her counting them. Then she let go and stepped back and dropped her hands to her sides. "Reflexes," she said. "My apologies, Admiral. It won't happen again." She turned and walked off parade ground. 2,000 Marines watched her go. Not one of them moved. She walked past the reviewing stand and past the color guard and past a row of company commanders who had all been trained extensively and expensively in what to do when a senior officer loses control, and who all discovered simultaneously that none of that training had covered this. Ashcroft stood alone in the middle of his own ceremony, with his hands still half raised and his wrist beginning distantly to ache. In the third row of Bravo Company, Private First Class Nia Barrett had moved. Not far, half a step. Her right foot had come out of alignment by maybe 8 inches, and her weight had shifted forward, and for 1/4 of 1 second, she had been a 19-year-old girl from Bakersfield who was about to break formation in front of a 2-star admiral. Then she'd put her foot back. Nobody saw it. That was the worst part. Nobody saw it. Nobody would ever mention it. Nobody would hold it against her. She had done nothing, and doing nothing was so completely structurally correct that there wasn't even a word for it. She stood at attention for the remaining 11 minutes of the ceremony, and she did not hear a single thing that was said. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hollis Boone had watched the whole thing from the edge of the field with his arms crossed, and his opinion as usual. Already fully formed. His opinion at the start had been civilian. His opinion 20 seconds in had been civilian, who's about to have a very bad afternoon. His opinion now was different, and it was bothering him. Boone had run the Radar Reconnaissance Assessment for 6 years. Before that, he'd spent 14 years in places that didn't have names on maps. He had personally broken 461 men, and he had a professional's eye for the exact moment a human being decides they've had enough. It's not in the face. It's in the shoulders. The shoulders come up half an inch and never go back down. Her shoulders hadn't moved. She'd been hit hard enough to split her lip against her own teeth, and her shoulders hadn't moved, and when Ashcroft came back for a second swing, she had caught it without shifting her feet, which meant she'd already been balanced for it, which meant she'd been reading his weight the entire time, which meant that from the moment he'd raised his voice, she had been quietly running the math on how to put a rear admiral face down on the concrete and had simply decided not to. Boone had seen that once before, Coronado 2009, a guy who'd looked like a substitute teacher and turned out to have 41 months of combat under a classification. Boone still didn't have the clearance to read. He uncrossed his arms and went to find out who the hell had just walked onto his base. She made it as far as the head outside Building 400 before her hands started shaking. That was normal. She'd stopped being embarrassed by it years ago. The body doesn't know the difference between I let him hit me and I got hit. It just knows adrenaline came and had nowhere to go, and now it has to leave through the fingers. Her instructors at Coronado had called it the debt. You always paid it. The only choice you got was where and in front of whom. She ran the cold tap and put her wrists under it and waited. In the mirror, the damage looked worse than it was. Split lower lip already swelling. A red bloom across the left cheekbone that would go purple by nightfall and yellow by the weekend. Nothing broken. She'd taken worse from a 15-year-old girl in a training cage in Virginia Beach. What she couldn't look at directly was the other thing. Because for one full second out there, 1 second between the strike and the moment she brought her chin back to level, a very old and very specific part of Adeline Carrick had wanted to kill him. Not hurt him, not humiliate him. There had been a complete plan in her head, start to finish, involving his throat and the edge of the reviewing platform, and it had assembled itself without her permission in less time than it takes to swallow. She had spent 7 years building the thing that put that plan back in the box. It was getting harder every year. The door opened. She heard him coming from 30 feet out, heavy man favoring his left knee, walking like he wanted her to know he was walking. Boone filled the doorway and did not come in. That door is supposed to be locked, he said. It was. She didn't turn around. I unlocked it. Why? Because I heard you coming and I didn't feel like having this conversation twice. He absorbed that. She watched him do it in the mirror. He had a face like something that had been quarried rather than born, and the interesting thing about it was that it didn't get angry. It got slower, which in her experience was significantly more dangerous. You want to tell me what that was? That was a rear admiral hitting a contractor. That's what it looked like. That's not what it was. She turned around then and let him see the lip. Boone had 2 daughters, 15 and 12. He was not a sentimental man, and he considered sentimentality a tactical liability. And he still felt something turn over in his chest when he looked at that mouth. You're going to want to get that looked at, he said. I've had worse. I believe you. He shifted his weight off the bad knee. That's actually the part I've got a problem with. She almost smiled. It hurt, so she stopped. Ma'am, Boone said, and it cost him something to say. She could hear the cost. I've been doing this a long time. I know what I saw. So I'm going to ask you once straight, and then I'm going to leave you alone. Who are you? Adeline Carrick, Tactical Assessment Contractor, Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. I'm here to observe your training protocols for 11 days, and then I'm going home. That's what your badge says. That's what my badge says. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said and left. She waited until his footsteps were gone, and then she put both hands on the sink and let her head hang for a count of 10. 11 days. She had 71 hours and 40 minutes. She made the call from the seawall on the north perimeter, where the wind was loud enough to eat the edges of a voice. This is Vesper. Go! Commander Isabel Ruiz never wasted a syllable. Adeline had met her exactly twice in 4 years and would have walked into a burning building for her. I'm burned in a way I didn't plan for. Ashcroft made me at a public ceremony this morning. A pause. Made you how? He put me on the ground in front of 2,000 people. Then he tried to do it again and I stopped him. The pause was longer this time. When Ruiz came back, her voice had changed by about 2 degrees, which from her was a scream. He put hands on you. Once in front of the entire base. Are you compromised? No. Adeline watched the gull fight the wind and lose. That's what's bothering me, ma'am. He didn't do it because he lost his temper. I've watched a lot of men lose their tempers. His breathing never changed. Explain. When somebody snaps the strike is the end of something. It's the release. He was watching me the whole way through, before, during, after. He was reading my face when his hand was still in the air. She let that sit. I don't think hit me because he was angry. I think he hit me to see what I'd do. Ruiz was silent for 8 seconds. Adeline counted those too. And what did you do? I stood there and bled and didn't blink. Which is what nobody does. Which is what nobody does, Adeline agreed. So he knows. He suspects. There's a difference, and I intend to live inside it for the next 3 days. Another silence. Then Ruiz said very evenly, Vesper, listen to me. I'm going to say this once because I'm required to and because I actually mean it. The mandate is observe and report. You are a set of eyes. You are not an intervention. If Ashcroft makes the handoff, we take him afterward with paper in a courtroom, and the country never has to know how close it came. Understood. That was not a yes. It was understood, ma'am. She could hear Ruiz decide not to fight her about it. That more than anything else told Adeline how bad the intelligence actually was. Give me the picture, Adeline said. It's worse than the brief. We've been reading his financials for 9 weeks, 4 accounts, 3 jurisdictions, and a pattern going back at least 5 years. The current product is codenamed Gray Window on his end. We know it's tied to Carrier Strike Group 11. We know the transfer is scheduled inside a 72-hour window starting tonight. We don't know what it is. You don't know what he's selling. We know what it's worth. Ruiz's voice went flat. $11 million, split into 2 payments. Vesper, nobody pays $11 million for a patrol schedule. Adeline felt the cold come up through her boots. Who's buying? A broker. Goes by the cartographer. Real name Tomas Reiner, probably. Austrian passport, 4 aliases, we've confirmed, and here's the part I want you to hear. Twice he has never once been photographed carrying a weapon. Not in 11 years. He doesn't need to. A beat. He sells locations, Vesper. That's the whole business. He finds out where people are going to be, and then he sells it to whoever wants them not to arrive. The wind came off the water, and Adeline stood very still inside it. Ma'am, I know. Say it anyway. 4 years ago, somebody sold the insertion window for a Raider recon element in the Baca, Ruiz said quietly. 8 men, no survivors. Your brother's team. We have never been able to source the leak, and we have never been able to close the file. And I am telling you right now on the record that Reiner's name has never appeared in that investigation. But it's the same product. Ruiz exhaled. It's the exact same product. Adeline didn't answer for a while. Vesper? Still here. I need to hear you say you're an observer. I'm an observer, Adeline said, and she meant it at the time, which was the strange part. She really did mean it. Lieutenant Colonel Ward Prosser found her 40 minutes later, and he came in like weather warm, unhurried, taking up space in a way that made you want to move toward it instead of away. He was carrying an instant cold pack and a bottle of water, and he set both down on the table in front of her before he said a word. I'm not going to insult you by apologizing on his behalf, he said. It's not mine to give, and it wouldn't be worth anything. But I've been the chief of staff on this base for 4 years, and I want you to know that what happened this morning is not who we are. She took the coal pack. She'd learned that refusing kindness makes people remember you. Thank you, sir. Ward. He sat down across from her without asking, which most people didn't do, and folded his hands. Ms. Carrick, can I be honest with you? I'd prefer it. Dalton Ashcroft is the most disciplined officer I have ever served under. In 4 years, I have never seen him raise his voice, not once. Not when we lost 2 Marines in a vehicle rollover, not when the IG came through in November, not ever. He looked genuinely troubled, and there was nothing in his face that wasn't. So I've spent the last hour trying to build a version of this morning that makes sense, and I can't do it. Neither can I, Adeline said, and that was true too. Do you have any idea why he might have reacted to you specifically? And there it was. It was a good question. It was a completely reasonable question asked in exactly the tone a decent man would use. She would think about that question a great deal later till she would take it apart in a dark room at 2 in the morning, 18 hours from now, and understand it entirely differently. But at the time, it just sounded like concern. I'm a stranger with a badge he didn't recognize, she said. Some men don't like that. Some men don't. Prosser nodded slowly. What is it you actually do, if you don't mind my asking? Your paperwork says tactical assessment, and that's the vaguest phrase in the English language. It is. She let herself smile carefully on the undamaged side. I watch people train, and I write reports that nobody reads. That's a waste of you. Most things are, sir. He laughed at that, a real laugh, easy and unguarded, and stood and rested one hand briefly on the back of the chair. Anything you need while you're here, you come to me. Not the front office, me. He picked up his cover. And Ms. Carrick for what it's worth. I saw you catch his arm. I know you did, sir. I've been trying to figure out how you knew it was coming. I didn't, she said. I just assumed it was. He left. She sat with the coal pack against her cheek and thought, that's a man who's easy to talk to. She thought it the way you note a weather condition. It did not occur to her not for 1 second to write it down. Sorry. The summons came at 15:30. She walked into Ashcroft's office 13 minutes early, which she had done deliberately, and she had changed her shirt, but not her clothes, the same olive t-shirt in a fresh copy, the same camo trousers, the same scuffed boots, the same ponytail retied but not made neater. She had thought about that for a while. The instinct was to clean up to show respect to lower the temperature. She decided to do the opposite. She wanted him to look at exactly what he'd hit. She made no attempt to hide the cheek. It had gone from red to a deep, unambiguous plum, and it had begun to swell in a way that pulled her left eye slightly out of shape. Ashcroft was behind his desk, 2 lieutenants flanking him like he thought he needed them. Prosser stood by the window with his arms folded and an expression Adeline couldn't read. Ms. Carrick, Ashcroft did not offer her a chair. I've spent the afternoon reviewing this morning's incident with my staff judge advocate. She waited. You entered a restricted ceremonial formation without authorization from the base commander. You interfered with a change of command ceremony in progress. And when I moved to have you removed, you laid hands on a flag officer in front of 2,000 Marines. He let it land. That's assault conduct unbecoming and interference with military operations. Any one of those ends your career. Together they end your freedom. You struck me first, sir. I did nothing of the kind. She let a beat pass. 2,000 people, she said. 2,000 people, Ashcroft agreed calmly, saw a civilian in a t-shirt lunge at their commanding officer. What they believe they saw before that is going to depend entirely on the statement my staff collects over the next several days. He smiled at her. It was a patient, almost fatherly smile, and it was the single most chilling thing that had happened to her that day. Perception is a resource, Ms. Carrick. I've been managing it professionally since before you were born. Prosser shifted at the window. He didn't say anything, but he shifted. However, Ashcroft leaned back. Given your unusual position and given that I have no particular desire to spend the next year in depositions, I'm prepared to offer you an alternative. I'm listening. You came here to assess our training, so assess it from the inside. He opened a folder without looking at it. Radar reconnaissance assessment, 72 hours beginning at 0500 tomorrow. It is the most demanding selection event in the United States Marine Corps, and it has a 68% attrition rate among serving officers. You complete it, I withdraw every charge, apologize personally, and you write whatever report you like. He closed the folder. You quit, you fail, or you're carried off. You leave this base in restraints, and your clearance dies on the way out the gate. The room got very quiet. Prosser turned around fully. Sir, with respect, that's not a selection event, it's a hazing. She's a civilian. Somebody's going to end up medevaced, and it's going to be on your signature. I wasn't asking you, Colonel. Adeline said nothing at all. She was in fact doing arithmetic. Because she had spent the previous evening in the base library with the assessment's public safety documentation, the route maps and the medical staging plan, which were unclassified because they had to be filed with the state EMS authority, and she had read them the way you read a legal contract, which is to say slowly and twice. The 32-kilometer forced march ran the coastal access road. The coastal access road passed within 400 meters of the decommissioned fueling pier. The nightland navigation phase used the eastern grid. The eastern grid contained the old transmitter station. And the final evolution, Levy Fire Urban Simulation, Day 3, was staged in the mock village. The mock village was 212 meters from Bunker 9. Adeline had spent 9 days trying to invent a reason to be in any one of those three places. She had been building a plan involving a stolen maintenance vehicle and a forged work order in a 90-second window that she'd rated honestly at about a 30% chance of not ending her career. And Rear Admiral Dalton Ashcroft was standing in front of her, quite pleased with himself, ordering her to go to all three. She laughed. It was not a nervous laugh, and it was not a defiant one. It came up out of her genuinely, and it hurt her lip, and she laughed anyway. And it went on just slightly too long, and every man in that room found it deeply unpleasant to listen to. Ashcroft's jaw tightened. Something funny. No, sir. She wiped her eye. I'm sorry, it's been a strange day. I asked you a question. You did. She stepped up to the edge of his desk. It's just I've been trying to find a polite way to get access to your training areas since I got here, and your entire staff has been very good at telling me no. And now you're going to make me go through all of them at gunpoint. She tilted her head. I appreciate it. I mean that. You think this is a joke. I think you have no idea what you've just done, Admiral, which is fine. Most people don't until later. He stood up. He was a tall man and he used it. Let me be extremely clear with you, he said quietly. 72 hours from now, you will be in a hospital or you will be on a bus. You will not be on my base. And whatever it is you think you're doing here, whatever little errand somebody in Washington sent you on because they thought a pretty face would go unnoticed, it ends tomorrow. In pain, publicly. Adeline looked at him for a long moment. Sir, she said, may I tell you something true? By all means. This morning when you hit me for about 1 second, I had a plan for how to take your throat out with the edge of the platform. She said it in the same tone she'd have used to report the time. I decided not to. I want you to understand that it was a decision, not an inability. Nobody in the room breathed. I'll report at 0500, she said. You'll want to be there. It's your assessment. She walked to the door, then stopped with her hand on it. And Admiral, ice that wrist tonight. The swelling comes up around hour 6. She left. Ashcroft stood very still for 11 seconds after the door closed. Get out, he said. All of you. Prosser was the last to go. He paused at the threshold. Sir, for the record, I think this is a mistake. Noted. Sir, noted, Ward. The door shut. Ashcroft sat down. His wrist was throbbing. It had been throbbing for 6 hours, and he had at some point around noon stopped being able to think about anything else. He rolled the cuff back and looked at it. There were 4 faint marks on the underside, not bruises, yet just the pale shapes where the blood had been pushed out and hadn't fully come back. 4 fingers, very neatly spaced. She had not gripped hard. That was the thing he kept returning to. He'd spent 31 years around men who gripped hard to prove something, and she had not done that. She had applied precisely as much pressure as the physics required and not 1 ounce more. And then she had released him at 3 seconds, not 2, not 4, because she had been telling him something. He opened his desk drawer, moved a stack of correspondence, and took out a phone that had never made a call to anyone in the state of Oregon. It rang 2 times. You're early, said a voice with no particular accent anywhere in it. There's a woman on my base. There are a great many women on your base, Dalton. It's the 21st century. Don't? Ashcroft closed his eyes. Pentagon paper, tactical assessment, 25 years old, arrived 9 days ago, and has been very politely asking for access to areas she has no business in. A pause. Name Carrick, Adeline Carrick. That means nothing to me. It meant nothing to me either. So this morning I tested her. The silence on the other end changed quality. Explain, tested. I hit her, Ashcroft said, in front of the formation, hard. The cartographer did not react for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone very soft, and it was the softness of a man who has just watched someone knock over something expensive. Say the rest. She didn't flinch. Ashcroft heard his own voice and didn't like it. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't raise a hand to her face. She let it bleed. And when I went again, she caught my arm out of the air and held it long enough to make a point and then apologized. He swallowed. Nobody does that. In 31 years, I have never once seen a human being do that. No, the cartographer agreed. They don't. So I know what she is. You know what she isn't, which is a paper pusher, and those are not the same knowledge. A sound like a chair moving. Dalton, I want you to understand something about the position you have put us in. If she had screamed, you would have learned that she was a clerk and the matter would be closed, and I would be mildly annoyed with you for making a scene. Instead, you have publicly assaulted an operator of unknown affiliation in front of 2,000 witnesses 71 hours before delivery. Do you understand what you have actually accomplished? I've contained her. Ashcroft leaned forward. I've put her into the radar assessment, 72 hours starting at 0500 tomorrow. She will be under continuous supervision by my cadre on my routes on my clock for every hour between now and the handoff. She will be too busy surviving to look at anything else. Another pause. Say that again, the cartographer said. I've put her into the assessment. You have put a suspected operator, the cartographer said slowly, onto every restricted training area on your installation, legally, with a badge, with a reason to be there. Ashcroft opened his mouth, and then he closed it because his stomach had just dropped through the floor of the building. The march route, he said, yes. The march route runs the coastal access road. It does. The final evolution is, he couldn't finish it. 212 meters from your bunker, the cartographer said. I measured it in Twinquinu. I measure everything, Dalton. It's the entire nature of my profession. A long breath. You did not contain her. You issued her a key and told her the schedule. Ashcroft's hand was shaking. He put it flat on the desk to stop it. Then I pull her out. On what grounds you announced it in front of your chief of staff, who already objected on the record, and if you reverse yourself in the next 11 hours, you will be telling every officer in that room that the woman frightened you. The cartographer's voice was almost kind now, which was worse. No, she goes through it. You have no other option. Then what do I do? You accelerate, the cartographer said. The window moves to 1400 on day 3. Day 3 is the live fire evolution. The whole base will be watching 16 exhausted men shoot at each other in a mock village, while every evaluator, every medic, and every senior officer on your installation stands in one place with their backs to me. A dry sound that might have been amusement. You've spent all afternoon congratulating yourself on giving her cover, Dalton. I'm simply going to borrow it. The line went dead. Ashcroft sat in the dark for a long time. Twice he reached for the phone to cancel the assessment, and twice he stopped because both times he saw Prosser's face at the doorway and heard himself saying noted, and he understood that the version of Dalton Ashcroft who could still back out had ceased to exist somewhere around 10 o'clock that morning. Eventually he flexed his wrist. It didn't want to close all the way. Ice it tonight. The swelling comes up around hour 6. He looked at the clock. It had been 6 hours. Adeline didn't go back to quarters. She walked the perimeter road until the light went, and then she kept walking, and somewhere around the 3rd mile, the shaking in her hands finally stopped for good. At the north end, she stopped and pulled the chain out from under her collar. It wasn't a full set. It was one tag, and it wasn't even legible anymore. 4 years of being carried against skin had worn the stamping down to a suggestion. A ghost of letters you could read with a thumb but not an eye. She'd been offered a replacement. She'd said no. The whole point of it was that it was the one that had come home when he hadn't. She held it in her fist. She thought about $11 million. She thought about a man who had never been photographed with a weapon because he didn't need one, because all he sold was where people would be, and that was enough. That had always been enough, and 8 men had learned it in a valley 4 years ago at 4:20 in the morning. She thought about the fact that she was an observer. She thought about how much she had meant it when she'd said it. 3 days, she said to nobody, to the wind, to a scrap of metal with no letters left on it. You waited 4 years. Wait 3 more days. Then she turned around and walked back to the barracks, and she set an alarm for 0400, and she lay down on top of the blanket with her boots on because she'd stopped taking them off somewhere around her second deployment. She did not sleep. 8:0500, she would stand in a line of 15 Marine officers who had all spent their careers earning the right to be there, and a man who had already decided she was a joke would call her a princess in front of every one of them, and the clock would start. She was counting on it. 16 candidates formed up at 0455, and 15 of them were doing the same arithmetic. They weren't looking at her hair or her build or the bruise that had gone the color of a storm front across her left cheek. They were looking at the T-shirt and the trousers with no name tape and no rank and no unit, and every one of them was calculating what it meant that the thing standing next to them wasn't a Marine. Captain Deke Vollmer said it out loud because somebody always does. You lost ma'am, medical's the other building. I'm where I'm supposed to be. You're where somebody told you to be. He wasn't cruel about it. That was almost worse. He sounded genuinely sorry for her. There's a difference, and around hour 9, you're going to feel it. Adeline didn't answer. She was watching the equipment, tables counting, rucks counting, canteens counting, the medical staging vehicle, and the number of corpsmen loaded into it, and building the shape of the next 72 hours out of logistics, the way other people built it out of nerves. Then Boone came out of the building, and everybody stopped talking. He walked the line without hurrying. 16 men and women, and he gave 15 of them about a second and a half apiece. He stopped in front of her and stayed there. Candidate Carrick. Master Guns. I've run this course 6 years, 461 candidates, 0 civilians. He let that sit. You understand what that number means. It means the ones who tried didn't finish. It means the ones who tried never started because somebody with sense stopped them at the gate. He leaned in maybe 2 inches. There's no politics on my course, princess. No accommodation, no adjusted standard. You get the same clock and the same weight as every officer on this line. And when you quit, and you will quit because everybody quits, that's the entire point of the thing. I will personally walk you to the front gate, and I will not say one unkind word to you the whole way. Are we clear? Yes, Master Guns. You got anything to say? One thing. Go. I don't quit, Adeline said. It's not courage. It's a defect. My brother had it too. Something moved behind Boone's face and was gone. He turned to the group. First evolution, 32 kilometers coastal access road, 36 kilos 4-hour cutoff. Anybody outside the cutoff is done. No appeal, no discussion, no second look. Step off in 6 minutes. The line broke for the equipment tables. Boone stayed exactly where he was, and he watched her ruck up, and what he saw did not make him feel better. She didn't fight the weight. That was the tell. Every man on that line was fighting the weight, hoisting it wrong, hauling on the straps, doing the little compensating hop that people do when they're carrying something that wants to fall off them. She rolled the ruck up the back of her thighs, seated it, cinched the waist belt before the shoulders, and then stood still for 4 seconds, with her eyes half closed, feeling where the load was sitting, and made one adjustment. Boone had taught that. He'd taught it for 6 years to men who never got it because you don't get it from instruction. You get it from carrying weight for so many years that your body stops arguing. Master Guns. His senior instructor, Staff Sergeant Reyes, had come up beside him. She weigh in clean 36.2. I checked it twice. Check it again after. Reyes hesitated. You think she's dumping it? No, Boone said. I think when she comes in, I want a number I can defend. She dropped 3 men in the first 8 kilometers just by refusing to walk. That was the thing nobody had accounted for. There was a rhythm to a march like this, an unspoken cartel, where everybody agrees to hurt at approximately the same rate, and she never signed on to it. She just moved, not fast, not dramatic, just an absolutely constant machine pace that never varied for hills or wind, or the 10th kilometer where the shoulders start to scream. By 14 kilometers, she was 4th. By 20, she was second. By 24, she had stopped feeling her hands. That was normal. Circulation goes at the shoulder straps, and the fingers reported as a rumor. She flexed them in sequence, thumb through pinky, the way she'd been taught in a cold water tank at Coronado by an instructor who told her cheerfully that the day her hands stopped coming back was the day she'd know she'd finally trained hard enough. She had a fixed rule for pain, learned early and never once broken. You are allowed to acknowledge it. You are not allowed to negotiate with it. The moment you start negotiating, you've admitted there's a deal available. At kilometer 26, the road bent west, and the water came up on her right, and she counted trucks. Four unmarked box trucks in a staging lot that the base's own facilities map listed as inactive backed up to a structure, the map called Storage 9, and one of them was sitting low on its rear axle the way a truck sits when it's carrying something dense and small, rather than something bulky and light. She did not turn her head. She'd learned that too. You don't look at the thing, you look past it and let your peripheral do the work. Because a head turn is a signature, and a signature is a photograph, and a photograph is a phone call. She counted 11 strides between the first truck and the last. She counted the number of doors on the structure. 2. She counted the vehicles parked at the far end, a sedan government plates, which was interesting because base facilities didn't run sit-ins. Then it was behind her, and she filed all of it and kept moving. He told me to walk this road, she thought. He stood in his office with 2 lieutenants and a colonel, and he ordered me to walk this exact road. She almost laughed again. She didn't have the air for it. She crossed the finish at 3 hours 41 minutes. The cutoff was 4 hours. The course record set 11 years earlier by a Force Recon gunnery sergeant who'd gone on to do things nobody talked about was 3:38. Boone was standing at the line with a stopwatch he did not need because there was a digital clock running 6 feet away, and he had been holding it since 0730. She stopped, unclipped the waist belt, and let the ruck come off her back into her hands instead of dropping it, which was another thing that made his stomach turn over, because dropping it is what you do when you're done, and catching it is what you do when you're not. Time, Boone said, 3:41 master guns. Second fastest in 6 years. I know what the record is. Do you? He watched her breathing. It was heavy. It was not ragged. There is an enormous difference, and he'd spent his whole life learning to hear it. You want to tell me what the record is? 3:38. How do you know that? It's on a plaque in your building. I read it on day 1. Why, bayom, Adeline wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. The lip had opened again somewhere around kilometer 19, and she hadn't noticed. Because I like to know what's possible before I decide what I'm capable of, she said. Reyes reweighed her ruck, 36.2. Boone went and sat in his truck for 4 minutes with the door closed and his hands on the wheel, and then he pulled out his phone. The response came back at 11:42. He'd sent a routine records query, the kind he ran on every candidate, the kind that came back in 9 minutes with a service record and a medical file and a note about somebody's knee. What came back was 4 lines. Subject Carrick Adeline Emma record restricted tier 7. All queries logged. Discontinue inquiry. Do not approach subject regarding record. This response will purge in 60 seconds. Boone read it 3 times, which used up most of the 60 seconds. He had been in the Marine Corps for 26 years. He had run background on men who'd worked out of buildings with no signs on them. He had once queried a candidate and gotten back a file that was 90% black bars, and had thought at the time that it was the strangest thing he'd ever see. He had never seen tier 7. He had never met anyone who had seen tier 7. He'd assumed in a vague way that the tiers stopped at 5 because that's where his clearance stopped, and the world had always been kind enough to end where he did. The screen went white and the message was gone. All queries logged. Somebody somewhere now knew that a master gunnery sergeant at Whitmore Point had gone looking, and the part that made the back of his neck go cold was this: they had not told him she was cleared. They had not told him she was legitimate. They had told him to stop, which was not reassurance, it was containment, and containment meant that whatever she was, it was big enough that the system's first instinct was to protect itself from him, knowing it. He put the phone face down on his knee. All right, he said out loud in an empty truck. All right, Shem. The hand-to-hand evaluation ran at 300, and Adeline had it finished in 51 seconds. Not one bout, all 3. The first instructor came in fast and heavy and honest, a Golden Gloves welterweight from Reyes's shop who'd been told to make it hurt, and had every intention of doing so. He got one jab off. She wasn't where the jab went. She was inside it, and her elbow went into his floating rib with the kind of placement that isn't strength, it's anatomy. And he sat down on the mat with his mouth open like a man who'd been unplugged. 19 seconds. The second one had watched the first and adjusted, which was smart, and he tried to take her to the ground, which was fatal. She let him. She went down willingly, which no one ever does. And by the time he understood that he had not taken her anywhere, she hadn't chosen to go, her forearm was across his carotid, and he was tapping the mat with a hand that had gone slack. 17 seconds. The third one, Master Sergeant Coyle, was 44 years old and had been doing this since before she was in middle school, and he did the only intelligent thing available, which was to refuse to close. He circled. He kept distance. He made her come to him. She stood there for 6 full seconds and did absolutely nothing. And the entire room got very quiet, and then Coyle's weight shifted maybe 2 inches onto his lead foot, and she moved. 15 seconds. Total elapsed 51. The previous record was 3 minutes 58. Nobody clapped. 16 candidates and 8 cadre in a room full of people who had spent their entire adult lives around violence. And the only sound was Coyle trying to figure out how to breathe from the floor. Adeline walked back to her start position and stood at ease. Vollmer, the captain who told her medical was in the other building, was staring at her like she'd changed species. Where, he said, his voice came out wrong and he cleared it. Where does a Pentagon contractor learn that? She thought about lying. She was tired, and it was the third day of a headache that had started with a rear admiral's palm, and she was very, very tired of lying. My brother taught me, she said. Your brother in the service? He was. Vollmer opened his mouth and then, to his enormous credit, shut it again. Boone had watched the whole thing from the doorway with his arms folded and his jaw set. And what he was thinking was not she's fast, because fast was cheap, and he'd seen fast. He was thinking that's the Coronado sequence. Elbow to the ribs, then the throat, then the ground, in that order, always in that order, because it was built for a room with 3 more men in it and no time to spend on any of them. He'd seen it taught exactly once in 2013 by a chief who told him with total sincerity that if Boone ever saw a Marine using it, he should assume the Marine was lying about something. He went outside and stood in the parking lot and thought about Tier 7. She was going to sleep 3.5 hours in 72, and she knew it before she started. That wasn't bravado, it was arithmetic. The assessment allotted 11 hours of rack across 3 days, and she was going to have to spend 7.5 of them somewhere else. And so she began budgeting fatigue the way a soldier budgets water in advance, in sips without sentiment. She spent 40 minutes of it in the base records annex at 2140, and she got in on a badge that had been issued to her by a facilities clerk on day 2 for the entirely legitimate purpose of reviewing training documentation, which was one of those small bureaucratic gifts that make an operator believe in God. She wasn't looking for Ashcroft. She'd already read everything the Bureau had on Ashcroft. She'd read his fitness reports and his divorce filing and the transcript of a 2019 hearing where he testified about maintenance contracts. She knew the shape of him. What she was looking for was the Baka, because there was a hole in the story and it had been bothering her for 9 weeks. The unit that had been destroyed 4 years ago was a Raider reconnaissance element, and Raider elements did not just materialize in a valley. Somebody wrote the operational approval, somebody signed the insertion window, somebody's name went on the document that said these 8 men will be at this coordinate at this hour, and if you wanted to sell that document, you had to first be a person who was allowed to touch it. Ashcroft had been a captain in 21, in charge of a training command in Virginia. He had not been anywhere near that operation. He hadn't been in the theater. He hadn't been in the region. He hadn't been in the hemisphere. Adeline had known that for 2 months. She had assumed it meant he'd bought the document from somebody else and resold it, which was what brokers did, and she had let it sit. She stopped letting it sit at 2211. The file was a bound copy of a joint training command log, unclassified, retained locally, the kind of thing nobody thinks about because it isn't secret and therefore isn't interesting. It listed liaison assignments, who went where for how long on whose authority, and on page 19 under a heading about interagency planning support was a temporary duty assignment. 9 weeks, Regional Joint Planning Cell, Prosser WM, MAJ-USMC. She read it twice. She sat back and stared at the wall. It could be nothing. It was almost certainly nothing. There had been 60 or 80 officers rotating through that cell over the relevant period, and half the Marine Corps had touched the Baka in some administrative way, and the man had brought her a coal pack and sat down without asking and made her laugh with a split lip. But she heard his voice again. Do you have any idea why he might have reacted to you specifically? And this time she heard it differently. That was not a concern question. That was a collection question. It was the exact question you ask when you need to know whether the person in front of you understands why they're in danger. And then right behind it, the second one, what is it you actually do? She had answered that one. She had answered it easily with a little self-deprecating joke because he'd been warm and she'd been in pain, and warm is a lockpick. Adeline put both hands flat on the table. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. She did not have proof. She had a date range and a temporary duty assignment and a bad feeling, and she had been a professional long enough to know that a bad feeling is a hypothesis, not a conclusion, and that operators who confused the two got people killed. So she closed the log, put it back on the shelf in exactly the position she'd found it, and walked out at 22:47 with her face completely neutral. And she stopped telling Ward Prosser anything true. He found her at 6:30 the next morning, which was the second thing. She was between evolutions with 14 minutes of downtime standing against a wall, drinking water she didn't want, and he came around the corner with 2 coffees and that easy, unhurried warmth. They tell me you broke a record yesterday. Somebody's always breaking something. 51 seconds. He handed her a cup. She took it and did not drink it. Coyle's been in the Corps 22 years. He's telling everybody who'll listen that he's never seen anything like it, and Coyle doesn't say things like that. He circled. It cost him. That's what he said, too. Prosser leaned against the wall beside her, comfortable, unhurried. Can I tell you what I've been thinking about? Please. I've been thinking that a woman who moves like that doesn't come out of a Pentagon assessment office. He said it gently. There was nothing sharp in it at all. And I've been thinking about why somebody like that would be walking around my base with a badge that says something else. She let a beat go by. You've got a theory. I've got a worry. He turned his head to look at her. My worry is that somebody sent you here without telling you what you were walking into. My worry is that there's something wrong on this installation, something I've felt for about 2 years and never been able to put a hand on, and that Washington knows it, and that instead of sending a team, they sent one person and a cover story. His jaw tightened, and that person got hit in the face in front of 2,000 Marines on her 9th day. It was a beautiful piece of work. That was what she'd think about later, the sheer craft of it. He wasn't asking her to confirm anything. He was offering her an ally. He was building a room with a door in it and standing on the other side saying, come in, it's warmer. 12 hours earlier, she'd have walked through it. Sir, she said, if there were something wrong on this base, what would you do about it? Depends what it is. Say it's above you. Prosser was quiet for a moment. Then I'd need somebody with reach. Somebody outside the chain. He looked at her steadily. Somebody like whoever's actually holding your leash, Ms. Carrick. There it is, she thought. He's not fishing for who I am. He's fishing for who I report to. There's no leash, sir. She smiled small and rueful and let a little exhaustion into it because exhaustion is the most convincing thing a person can offer. There's a GS-13 named Halloran who wants 11 pages on your obstacle course by the end of the month and who has never once returned my calls. That's the whole conspiracy. Prosser held her eyes a second longer than was comfortable. Then he laughed the same easy laugh from the day before and pushed off the wall. All right, drink your coffee. They're going to hurt you today. They've been hurting me since Tuesday, sir. Tuesday was an admiral, he said. Today's professionals. He walked away, and Adeline stood there with a cup of coffee she was not going to drink and thought he came to me twice in 19 hours, and both times he asked about my reporting chain, and neither time did he ask what I found, which meant one of 2 things. Either he didn't care what she'd found, or he already knew. The Nightland navigation phase started at 2000, and it was the one she'd been waiting for. 6 candidates had washed by then, 2 had quit outright, 1 had gone out on a stress fracture, and 3 had missed cutoffs, and Boone had walked every one of them to the gate personally and not said one unkind word, exactly as promised. The remaining 10 went out individually on staggered start times with a compass, a map, a red lens, and 11 points to hit across the eastern grid. Adeline hit 10 of them in the first 4 hours and made the 11th 190 minutes early on purpose, and then she used the margin. The transmitter station was 600 meters off her leg, and it took her 11 minutes to close it, and she spent 9 on target. It should have been dead. It had been decommissioned in 2016. The base facilities plan listed it as a shell with the equipment stripped. The equipment had not been stripped. There was a rack inside running on a line that came in from a conduit that also should not have existed, and there was a cooling unit on it, and cooling units are the loudest thing a secret can do because heat is the one thing you can't classify. She did not go inside. She photographed the exterior conduit run, in the meter, in the padlock, a commercial padlock, brand new on a government facility, which is a sentence that tells you everything, and she was moving again inside 10 minutes. At the final rally point, Boone was waiting with a clipboard and a Humvee and an expression like weather building offshore. Carrick, master guns, all 11 points. Time on the last one, 11:22. He didn't look at the clipboard. You had 190 minutes of margin, and you burned about 20 of it, somewhere between point .9 and point .10. She didn't answer. You want to tell me where I got turned around master guns? No, you didn't. Boone set the clipboard down on the hood. I want to say something, and I want you to let me finish. Can you do that? Yes. Yesterday morning, I decided you were a political appointment, and I was going to break you before lunch. By yesterday afternoon, I'd stopped thinking that. By last night, I ran your name through a system I've been running names through for 26 years, and what came back was 4 lines and a countdown timer, and one of those lines told me to stop looking. He rubbed his face with one hand. You know what Tier 7 is? I know what it means when somebody sees it. What's it mean? It means the person who sees it is now a liability to somebody, Adeline said, which I'm sorry about, Master Guns. I genuinely am. Boone stared out at the dark for a while. I got 2 girls at home, he said, 15 and 12. The 15-year-old told me last month she wants to enlist, and I've been lying awake ever since. He turned to face her. So here's where I am. I've got a woman on my course who moves like Coronado and files like a ghost. I've got an admiral who put a hand on her face in front of 2,000 Marines for no reason any of us can name. And I've got a bad feeling I've had for about 2 years that I've never once said out loud to anybody. What's the feeling? That something's wrong on this base, and I've been too comfortable to go looking. His voice came out rough on the last word. So I'm going to ask you one time straight, no games. Are you here to hurt this installation or protect it? Adeline looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached up and pulled the chain out from under her collar and held the tag out flat on her palm where the moonlight could hit it. You can't read it, she said. The stamping's gone, but you can feel it. Boone took it between 2 fingers and ran his thumb across the surface. She watched him find the letters. Carrick, he said quietly. E.J. Staff Sergeant Ezra Carrick, 1st Marine Raider Battalion. Her voice did not change at all, which was how he knew what it cost. 4 years ago, his element got put into a valley in Lebanon. 8 men. Somebody sold the insertion window 41 hours before they went in. They were waiting. Boone did not let go of the tag. No survivors. No survivors. In the leak. Never sourced. Files still open. Officially, it's a 50-50 between a foreign SIGINT hit and a local compromise, which is what they write when they don't want to say the other thing. What's the other thing? That it was one of ours, Adeline said. Boone let the tag drop back against her chest. He was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone somewhere flat and cold, and very far from the parade ground bark. Master Guns, she said, there's something happening on this base inside the next 36 hours. I don't know exactly what, and I'm not authorized to tell you the parts I do know. I have never been authorized. Everything I've said to you tonight, I said as a private citizen with a dead brother, and if you repeat it, I'll deny all of it, and they'll believe me over you. I know how this works. Then know this too. She looked at him. If you help me, you are betting your pension, your retirement, and your ability to look at your daughters and tell them their father followed the rules. And I can't tell you it'll be worth it because I don't know yet. Boone picked up his clipboard. 15 and 12, he said. You know what I actually lie awake about? It's not that Callie wants to enlist, it's that she'll enlist and get handed to somebody like the man who hit you Tuesday, and she'll stand there and take it because I raised her to respect rank. He signed the bottom of her sheet without looking at it. So don't sell it to me, I'm already bought. He handed her the clipboard. Go get 4 hours of rack. Final evolutions at 0800 day after tomorrow. And I'll be honest with you, Carrick, it's live fire. And I've had 2 people hurt bad on it in 6 years. I know when it is, she said. Yeah. Boone looked at her for a second too long. That's the part that's bothering me. She got 2 hours and 11 minutes. At 0327, she was awake and staring at nothing. And at 0341, her phone lit with a message from an address that rotated every 90 minutes. Vesper product definition updated. Gray window is not a patrol schedule. Repeat, not a schedule. Confirming now. Stand by, she read it 4 times. At 0402, the second message came. It's a sensor rotation, CSG 11, 40-minute interval, plus associated F-set. And then 90 seconds later, the third from Ruiz herself unencrypted, which she had never once done in 4 years. That's not espionage. That's a targeting package. Adeline sat up on the edge of the bunk with the phone in both hands. 40 minutes in every cycle where a carrier strike group's own sensor picture had a seam in it and a set of identification codes that would let something fly into that seam and not be engaged because the system would look at it and say, friend. 5,000 people on that carrier, 6,000 across the group. She had come here for a leak. She had come here because a man had sold a valley in Lebanon and she wanted his name. She was sitting on the edge of a bunk at 4 in the morning, holding a phone that said somebody was going to kill a carrier. The phone buzzed a 4th time. Addie, Ruiz had never used her first name. Not once, not in 4 years. The window moved. It's not 72 hours. Financials show second tranche staged for day after tomorrow, 1400 local. She was already standing. She was already reaching for her boots, which she had not taken off. Day after tomorrow, 1400. The final evolution began at 0800 and ran 8 hours, and at 1400, every evaluator, every corpsman, every senior officer, and every set of eyes on Whitmore Point would be standing in one place watching 10 exhausted candidates shoot at each other with live rounds in a mock village 212 meters from a building that 4 unmarked trucks had been backing up to for 3 days. Ashcroft hadn't given her cover. He'd given it to them, and he'd been so proud of himself for it. Adeline laced the second boot and stood up and felt something happen behind her sternum that she had not felt since a Tuesday 4 years ago, when 2 officers in service dress had knocked on her door in Virginia Beach, and she had known before either of them opened his mouth exactly what they were there to say. She typed 1 line back, understood, still an observer. She sent it. And then she sat back down in the dark and said out loud to nobody, that's a lie. She had 36 hours and every single one of them belonged to somebody else. That was the arithmetic Adeline ran at 1610, sitting in a parked truck behind the medical building with 4 stitches over her eye and a phone that wouldn't stop lighting up. NCIS wheels down at 2100, Fleet Cyber at 0400, a judge advocate team from Washington by noon tomorrow. And at 0900 the day after that, on the same parade ground, where a rear admiral had opened her lip in front of 2,000 Marines, Lieutenant Colonel Ward Prosser was going to be promoted to full colonel in a ceremony that had been on the calendar for 9 months. 36 hours to take down a man who was about to become the hero of the story. She called Ruiz from the truck and got 11 seconds of silence before her handler said anything. Say it again. He has the drive, ma'am. Physical custody, his safe, his chain. 8 witnesses watching me confirm it was the product. You confirmed it. I had 4 seconds and 6 MPs who take orders from him. If I'd said one word, I'd have been the unstable contractor with a grudge, and he'd have had all night to make the drive not exist. Adeline pressed the heel of her hand into her good eye. Ma'am, I want to be honest with you. I don't know if I made the right call. I've been going over it for 2 hours and I can build it both ways. You made the survivable call. Ruiz's voice had gone somewhere hard. Vesper, listen. I am going to say 4 things and then I'm going to do something that will probably end me. 1, I believe you. 2, I can't act on it. There is no authority I can walk into tonight with a 9-week-old TDY roster and a feeling. 3, the moment NCIS lands, this becomes their file, and their file will be built on the evidence in Prosser's safe, which means the case against Ashcroft will be excellent, and the case against Prosser will never be opened. And 4, a pause. The Baca approval had a signature block. I told you Ashcroft's name wasn't on it. I didn't tell you whose was because it was a colonel who's been dead of a heart attack since 23, and I didn't want to send you chasing a corpse. Papers moved, but there's a coordination line under the signature block. 3 initials. Nobody ever looks at coordination lines. They're clerical. Adeline stopped breathing. Say them. WMP. The truck was very quiet. That's not proof either, Ruiz said. A coordination initial means he routed the document. Half the Marine Corps routes documents. A defense counsel will destroy it in 90 seconds. It's not for a defense counsel, Adeline said. What? It's not for a courtroom, ma'am. She was already reaching for the door handle. Courtrooms are 18 months away, and he'll have 3 lawyers and a star by then. I don't need 12 jurors. I need 2,000 Marines in about 4 minutes. Ruiz was silent for the long moment. Vesper, if you do what I think you're about to do, I cannot protect you. There is no world in which I can protect you. I know. Say it back to me. You cannot protect me, Adeline said. Understood, ma'am. I've never once asked you to. Boone got the gate log at 1840 by walking into the guard shack telling a 19-year-old Lance Corporal that he needed the physical binder for a range control audit and signing for it in his own name. He got the signals log at 21:55, and it nearly ended him because the signals log was already gone. Purged at 15:02, he said, sitting down heavily across from her in the equipment cage. 58 minutes after you found them. There's a maintenance ticket, routine archive rotation. Who filed it? A civilian contractor with a badge number that doesn't resolve. Boone dragged a hand down his face. Carrick, that's item 7 for my folder, and it's the first one that doesn't have a good explanation. It's not items. Adeline was looking at the binder. It's the pattern. Master Guns listen a purge order is a document. Somebody had to route it. Boone's head came up slowly. You're saying check the coordination line. I'm saying check every coordination line on this installation for 4 years. She pushed the binder across. He's not careless with signatures. He's never signed anything. But somebody has to move paper, and the man who moves paper on a base is the chief of staff. And for 4 years, nobody has looked at the initials in the margin because initials in the margin are furniture. Boone stared at the binder. That's 1,000 documents. Then we need help. From who Carrick, there are 4 people on this base who know any part of this, and 2 of them are us. And that was when somebody knocked on the equipment cage door. Boone had his hand on his sidearm before he'd finished standing up. It was a 19-year-old private first class with a signals badge and hands that would not stay still. Master Guns, ma'am. Her voice cracked on the second word. PFC Barrett, ma'am. Nia Barrett. I work archive intake. Nobody said anything. I'm not supposed to be here, Barrett said. I know that. I've been standing outside for 11 minutes trying to make myself knock. Why'd you knock, Boone said. Because I was in the 3rd row on Tuesday. Adeline felt something move in her chest. I was in the 3rd row and I saw him hit her, Barrett said, and her chin was going, but her voice held. And I moved. I took half a step out of formation, Master Guns, half. And then I put my foot back because I've been in the Marine Corps 11 months, and everything I've been taught is that you don't break formation, and I've been thinking about that half step for 4 days, and I can't sleep. She was crying now and did not stop talking. Nobody saw it. That's the part. Nobody saw it, and nobody's ever going to know I did it, and it doesn't matter, and it's all I can think about. Boone opened his mouth and nothing came out. Barrett, Adeline said quietly, why are you here tonight? Because at 55:02 today, somebody purged a signals archive that I babysit, and the ticket came through my queue, and it wasn't routine. She wiped her face with her sleeve, hard angry at herself. It was a full sector purge with a suppressed retention flag, and nobody's run one of those since I got here. So I pulled the ticket, and I looked at who routed it, and then I went and threw up in the head, and then I came here. Adeline stood up. Say the name. There isn't a name, ma'am. Barrett swallowed. There's initials. They worked until 0340, and by the end there were 5 of them. Vollmer came at 22:30 because Boone finally told him the truth in a parking lot, and Vollmer listened to all of it without interrupting and then said, I knew the CCP move was wrong. I've known since 0740, and I let it go because you outrank me, and I've been sick about it all day. He'd been awake for 78 hours by then. He worked until dawn anyway. Coyle came at 2340 with his fused vertebrae and his bad shoulder and a box of coffee and said exactly one sentence when Boone tried to explain. Master Guns, she put me on the deck in 15 seconds and then told my Marines it was because I circled. Whatever she needs. Barrett pulled 291 routing records off a terminal she had no business being on, and the pattern came out of it like a shape out of fog. WMP on the purge order, WMP on the contractor badge issuance that Boone had put in his drawer 18 months ago, WMP on the facility's reclassification that had moved Storage 9 from active to inactive into 20, WMP on a 2022 gate T-log amendment, WMP on the coordination line of a joint approval in the BCA in April of 2021, 41 hours before 8, Marine raiders walked into a valley where somebody was already waiting. Not one signature. Not one. In 6 years, Ward Prosser had never once put his name on anything that mattered, but he had touched all of it. Boone sat back at door 210 and looked at what they'd built and said, "It's still not proof." "No," Adeline agreed. "A lawyer would say coincidence. A lawyer would say he's the chief of staff. He touches everything. That's the job." A lawyer would be right. "Then what the hell are we doing?" Adeline was quiet for a second. "Master Guns, how many people have to hear a thing before it stops being deniable?" Boone looked at her, and then Barrett said from the terminal in a very small voice, "Ma'am, I found the other thing." Whitmore Point had been the shore relay for the Pacific Quadrant in 2021. That meant every transmission that came up through the theater had touched a server on this base on the way to somewhere else. And it meant there was a relay copy, and it meant that whoever had sealed the primary 4 years ago had done a thorough and professional job of sealing the primary and had never once thought about the shore relay because nobody ever does. Barrett found it at 0217 in an archive marked for deletion in 2019 that nobody had gotten around to deleting. 11 minutes and 40 seconds of audio. "Ma'am," she said, "I can't play it for you. It's above me. It's above everybody in this room. If I open this file, my life is over." Adeline sat down next to her. "Barrett, look at me." The girl looked. "You don't have to do this. I want you to hear that from me clearly, once with witnesses. You are 19 years old. You have 11 months in, and every person in this room outranks you, and none of us can protect you. If you close that terminal right now and walk out and never say another word about it, I will tell anyone who asks that you were never here, and I will mean it, and I will not think less of you for 1 second of my life." Barrett's hands were shaking on the keyboard. "Ma'am," she said, "on Tuesday I put my foot back." She hit enter. The audio was bad, compression and distance, and 4 years of sitting on a server. But she knew the voice in 3 syllables. He was calm. That was the thing that took her apart. Ezra Carrick was calm the way he'd been calm at the kitchen table in Virginia Beach, explaining to his little sister why she was going to fail her first BODES attempt and go back and pass the second that same flat, unhurried fine. This is the situation voice with automatic fire underneath it. "Ridgelines occupied." "Say again." "Ridgelines occupied. They were set before we crossed the wire." A gap, somebody screaming a long way off. "Negative on exfil, negative the roads covered." They knew the window. Somebody gave them the window. Adeline had both hands flat on the desk. "Copy, understood. We're going to hold what we've got. Tell them it wasn't SIGINT. Tell them somebody sold it. I want that in the report. I want that in the static." Then nothing for 19 seconds. Then closer to the mic, quieter in a completely different register. "Relay, this is Carrick, personal traffic. I know you can't take it. Take it anyway." Nobody in the equipment cage was breathing. "I've got a sister, Adeline Carrick Coronado. She's in the pipeline. She's going to make it. She's better than me, and she doesn't know it yet." A short breath that was almost a laugh. "If this comes out the way it's coming out, she's going to go looking. That's what she does. She doesn't let things go. She never has. She's been like that since she was 6 years old, and it's the best thing about her, and it's going to eat her alive." Adeline had stopped being able to see. "So tell her I said don't. Tell her I said the mission's not the last thing you do. The mission's the thing you survive. Tell her to go live a whole life and put me down." A pause. "Tell her I said she was always going to be the better one. She'll argue. She always argues. Another burst of fire very close. Carrick out. The file ended. Nobody moved for a long time. Then Adeline Carrick put her face in her hands and made a sound that Hollis Boone would carry to the end of his life. Not a sob, nothing that clean, just a raw, scraped-out noise like something coming loose. Coyle turned around and looked at the wall. Vollmer, who had been awake for 81 hours, sat down on the floor. Barrett was crying openly with both hands over her mouth. Boone put a hand on Adeline's shoulder and left it there and said nothing. Because there was nothing, because he had 2 daughters at home and had just heard a man's last words to his sister, and there was not one single thing in the English language that belonged in that room. It took her about 90 seconds. Then she straightened up and wiped her face with the flat of her hand and looked at the screen. 4 years, she said. Her voice was ruined and steady. For 4 years, I've been telling myself he'd want me to find them. Carrick, he didn't. She laughed once horribly. He asked me not to. That's the last thing he ever said, and I never heard it because somebody sealed it, and I've spent 4 years of my whole life doing the exact thing he begged me not to do. Ma'am, Barrett said quietly, can I say something? Say it. He said don't go looking. The 19-year-old wiped her nose. He didn't say don't finish. Adeline turned and looked at her. He said the mission's the thing you survive, Barrett said. Ma'am, you did. You're the only one who did. The promotion ceremony formed at 0845 the next morning. 2,000 Marines, the same parade ground, the same gray light off the water, and the same wind in the same 25 meters between the formation and the platform, and Nia Barrett back in the 3rd row of Bravo Company, with her hands shaking so hard she had to lock her elbows. Ashcroft's arrest had gone out to the fleet at 2200 the night before. The story was already fully formed, and it was a good story. A rear admiral had been selling to a foreign broker for 15 years, and he had been caught, and the officer who had caught him was standing at the front of the parade ground in dress blues, waiting to be pinned. Ward Prosser looked good. He looked humble, which was the masterstroke head slightly down, hands behind his back, the exact posture of a man who does not think today should be about him. Adeline came out of the side of the formation at 0902 in an olive t-shirt and camo trousers with 4 stitches over her eye and a bruise gone yellow-green across her cheekbone, and she walked to the platform, and every single one of 2,000 people watched her do it. The base sergeant major moved to intercept her. Prosser waved him off. Of course he did. It was the perfect gesture, and he was in front of 2,000 witnesses, and she was the wounded federal officer who had just brought down a traitor, and the only possible thing a decent man could do was step aside for her. Ma'am, he said into the microphone warmly, and the field heard it. This is your day more than mine. Sir, I'd like to say something to the formation. Please. He stepped back. He would think about that step for the rest of his life. Adeline put both hands on the podium because she needed to and did not pretend otherwise. 4 days ago, I stood right there, she said and pointed. 25 meters 3rd file. A rear admiral called me a brat and hit me in the mouth in front of every one of you. 2,000 people did not move. Some of you have been apologizing to me in your heads all week. Stop. You did exactly what you were trained to do. You held formation, and you respected rank, and you trusted that somebody above you would handle it. She let that sit for a second. I'm here to tell you that what you were trained to do is not enough, and I'm going to prove it to you in about 4 minutes. She looked over at the sergeant major. Sergeant Major, I need the field system. He looked at Prosser. Prosser, standing 8 feet away in dress blues in front of 2,000 Marines, nodded because there was nothing else on earth he could do. The audio came up over the parade ground speakers in 11 seconds, and 400 people who had never met Ezra Carrick knew exactly what they were listening to, and the whole field went so quiet that you could hear the wind in the microphone. They knew the window. Somebody gave them the window. Tell them it wasn't SIGINT. Tell them somebody sold it. Adeline watched Prosser's face the entire time. He was superb. He listened with his head bowed and his jaw tight, the picture of an officer hearing something terrible, and at the exact right moment he closed his eyes. Then Boone walked out onto the platform with a binder. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hollis Boone, he said into the microphone. His voice carried the way it had carried across 6 years of formations. 26 years. Ran the radar assessment on this installation since 2019. He opened the binder. 18 months ago, I started a folder of things on this base that didn't add up. 6 items. I never did anything with it because every single one had a good explanation, and every single explanation came from the Chief of Staff's office. And I never noticed because that's his job. The field made a sound. Yesterday at 5502, the signals archive for the eastern sector was purged, Boone said. The order was routed, not signed. Coordination initials WMP. He turned a page. The contractor badge in item 4 of my folder routed, not signed WEMP. The reclassification that turned Storage Building 9 into an inactive facility in 2020 routed, not signed WMP. The gate log amendment in 22 same. Yesterday's installation-wide securing order, citing a range safety plan that does not exist in any system on this base and that I would have written myself because I have written every one for 6 years, signed by the Chief of Staff. He closed the binder. And in April of 20, Boone said the joint operational approval that put Staff Sergeant Ezra Carrick's element into that valley was routed for coordination by WMP. Prosser stepped forward. Master Gunnery Sergeant, he said, and his voice was warm and steady and full of sorrow. I have coordinated 10,000 documents in 6 years. That's the function. I understand that your PFC Barrett, Adeline said into the microphone. Third row Bravo Company, front and center. Nobody in 2,000 people breathed. Nia Barrett stood there for 1 full second. Then she stepped out of formation and marched to the platform, and her legs were shaking, and she did not stop walking. Ma'am, she said. Her voice cracked over the speakers, and everybody heard it crack. PFC Nia Barrett, archive intake 11 months in service. Tell them what you found. The purge ticket for the Eastern Sector Archive came through my queue at 1502 yesterday, ma'am. It was a full sector purge with a suppressed retention flag. She swallowed. The audio you just heard was the shore relay copy of a transmission from the Bekaa Valley on 14 April 2021. It was in a legacy archive scheduled for deletion in 2019. The purge order I received yesterday would have destroyed it in 11 hours. The wind went through the field. Somebody knew that recording existed, Barrett said, and her voice steadied on the last 4 words. Nobody's touched it in 4 years, and the day Lieutenant Carrick found the drive, somebody tried to delete it. Prosser's face did not change. That was the thing Adeline had been waiting 3 days to see, and now she saw it, and it was worse than a crack. Nothing happened at all. Adeline, he said, gently turning to her, using her first name in front of 2,000 people because he was that good. I want you to hear me. You've been awake for 4 days. You lost your brother. You were assaulted on this parade ground by a man I served under and failed to stop. Nobody in this formation blames you for... Tomas Reiner is in federal custody in Portland, Adeline said. Prosser stopped. I was moved at 0400 this morning, she said. Out of your jurisdiction, out of your chain, out of your reach, because a commander at Naval Special Warfare, who was going to lose her career over it, made a phone call at 2 in the morning to a United States attorney and told her exactly which chief of staff was going to be negotiating that man's immunity. For the first time, something happened in Ward Prosser's eyes. He's been talking for 6 hours, sir, Adeline said. He told me something in that building yesterday, and I've been thinking about it ever since. He said he never asked who was in the coordinate set. He said he's made it a policy not to ask. She leaned into the microphone. He also said his source on this installation has been consistent for 6 years, and that he was considerably better at it than the man who ran out the door. That's hearsay from a broker buying his way out. And at 0730 this morning, she said, the fleet cyber team opened your safe. The parade ground stopped existing. The drive was in it. Adeline's voice was completely level. The evidence bag was sealed. The chain of custody was perfect. You designed it yourself, sir, and I complimented you on it. And there were 2 access events on that drive logged between 1610 and 1622 yesterday afternoon on a device that was supposed to be inside a sealed bag inside your safe. Prosser did not move. You copied it, Adeline said. You had it for 2 hours and you couldn't wait. Somebody in the second rank said out loud, Jesus Christ. You've had 4 years of everybody bringing you things, she said. 4 years of being the man people go to when something's wrong. And the reason nobody ever caught you is that you never once signed anything. You just stood next to it being decent, being warm, asking the right questions in front of the right people. She stopped. Sir, when you came to see me Tuesday, you brought me a coal pack and you asked why Ashcroft reacted to me specifically. Wednesday, you asked who I reported to. 2 conversations. And in neither one of them did you ever ask me what I'd found. Silence. Because you already knew, Adeline said. 2 men from NCIS came up the steps behind him. Ward Prosser looked at the formation. 2,000 faces, every one of them turned toward him, and his mouth opened, and for 1 second it was possible to see the sentence he was building. The reasonable one, the one that would have worked on any of them a week ago. Then he saw that it wouldn't. Adeline, he said quietly off mic close enough that only she heard it. I never met him. Your brother. I want you to know I never. I know, she said. You never met any of them. That's the whole business. They took him off the platform in dress blues on the morning of his promotion, and 2,000 United States Marines watched it happen, and not one of them made a sound. She stood at the microphone for a moment afterward because there was one thing left. I'm not going to give you a speech about honor, Adeline said. You know those words better than I do, and you've heard them from better people. She looked at the third row of Bravo Company at the empty gap in the formation where a 19-year-old was standing on a platform. 4 days ago, every one of you watched a man in a uniform do something wrong, and every one of you knew it was wrong, and nobody moved. Including me. I stood there and let him do it because I had a mission, and the mission mattered more. So I'm not lecturing you, I'm in it with you. 2,000 people listened. There was one person on this field who moved, and she said, half a step, third row. She put her foot back and nobody saw it, and she's been sick about it for 4 days. And last night she opened a file that ended her career and gave my brother back to me. And about 90 seconds ago, she walked out of formation in front of every one of you to say a true thing to a colonel. She let that land. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. Rank is not righteousness. A uniform is not loyalty. My brother died because a man with a better record than his decided that a coordinate set was worth more than 8 lives, and he got away with it for 4 years, not because he was brilliant, but because nobody was willing to be the person who couldn't take yes for an answer. Her hand went to the chain at her collar. So the next time you see it, and you will see it, don't be brave. Bravery is too much to ask. Just be the person who looks twice. She came to attention and saluted the formation. 2,000 Marines saluted back, and then breaking every rule of military formation ever written, they started to applaud, and it rolled across that parade ground like weather, and it did not stop for a very long time. 14 months later, a lieutenant walked into a training cell at Coronado and found 6 candidates waiting for her, and one of them was Sergeant Nihia Barrett, 20 years old, who had been discharged, reinstated, decorated, and then quietly reassigned by a commander named Ruiz, who was still barely and by a single vote employed. Ward Prosser was serving 38 years at Leavenworth. Dalton Ashcroft had died of a stroke in a federal medical center 11 months into his sentence, still telling anyone who would listen about a phone call he never received. Thomas Reiner had given up 9 names in 4 countries and was in a facility that did not appear on any list. Hollis Boone had retired at 27 years and now coached a girls' soccer team in Bakersfield, and his 15-year-old had enlisted anyway, and he had let her and had cried about it exactly once in a parking lot where nobody could see him. Barrett stood up when Adeline walked in. Ma'am, permission to ask a question before we start. Go. How do I get to where you are? Adeline Carrick looked at her for a long moment, at a 20-year-old with a bad haircut and steady hands, who had once put her foot back and then spent the rest of her life refusing to. You already did, she said. The hard part was the first step out of formation. Everything after that is just training. She set her brother's tag on the table where all of them could see it, and it had no letters left on it at all, and it didn't need any. Let's go to work.